So we're up to the Mishnah on Daf Chav Vav. Mitch, I think I saw you last time, right? Yeah. I thought I did. Yeah. A few people who open their cameras. We're looking at the Mishnah on Daf Chav Vav. And we were talking about a case of a shliach who brings a get from Medina Sayyam. And after giving the get, he wants to marry this woman. We addressed the case of a chacham who established the validity of a neder that this woman took, and afterwards her husband divorced her because that neder prohibited her, or let's say prohibited him from getting any benefit from her. So he divorced her. Now that chacham who generated the Isur neder and validated the neder now wants to marry her. We also discussed the case, if you remember, of someone who testified that her husband died, and then after being matir her to get married to someone else, he himself, the aide, wants to get married. And in all these cases, we established that it's las. There's lazus fasayim. People are saying, well, what kind of testify? He was obviously motivated in order to be matir or to marry her. So v'kulam, in all these cases that we discussed, if they were married at the time that they testified, let's say he brought a get for, let's say, Rachel. He himself is married to Leah. He's Baruch Hashem, he's happily married. And now he's bringing a get to Rachel. Or he was a chacham and he validated the neder. Or he testified that, Rachel's husband died. But in all these cases, he himself was married. Umesu, and later on, the wife died, his own wife, let's say Leah died. Now he wants to marry Rachel. In this case, we don't have lazus vasayim. There's no chashad. We're not going to believe that he deliberately falsified his edus in order to allow himself later on down the line to marry Rachel, which is exactly what he wants to do now. But since at the time of his edus, or when he brought the get, or when he was a chacham on the bezdin to osa the neder, at that time he had a wife. Okay, later on, his wife died. Now he wants to marry this woman. Is in all these cases we don't believe that there's a chshad that l'mafreya retroactively we reveal that he was falsifying the truth in order to marry her. No, he was happily married, Baruch Hashem, at that time. What happened subsequently never happened. Now the Mishnah goes on. B'chulan, and in all these cases of these ladies, shenisu lacherim. In other words, after the testimony was accepted by Beis Din, and the courts decided to hand down a verdict that we have all the evidence we need to allow her to get married, she went ahead and married someone else. Afterwards, either her husband dies or he gave her a divorce. Now the original aide, the original witness, or the chacham wants to now come by and marry her. So nisu lachem v'nisgarsho nisarmalu, she got married to someone else based on the testimony of this witness, and now her husband died or divorced. She can go back and marry that chacham who was osa the neder, or that aide who testified on her gerushin or on her almonis, meaning that her husband died. And in these cases, we don't have any chashash that the original eidus, or the chacham who was oser the neder, did so for the express purpose and for the goal of being able to marry, because she married someone else. And that already quiets down any sort of chashash. There's no one's talking about the fact that the whole story was drummed up and it was falsified in order that he should be able to marry. So in other words, the Isser that we're going to impose on him not to marry this woman who he was matir is only during a very, very specific slice of time. It's basically immediately after his testimony, before she got married to another man. Once she gets married to another man, then we start a new slate. And the Mishnah adds, V'chulon, all these women that we mentioned earlier, where the aide or the chacham is not allowed to marry her, mutaros livneim olacheha. She's allowed to marry any of their relatives. I mean, the Mishnah gives two examples. Let's say the son of the aide or the chacham, or the brother of the witness or the chacham. In other words, that far of a chashash, we're not going to say that he falsified his aedus in order to allow his son to marry this woman. That far we won't. Now, based on the fact that the Mishnah says that if the aide, again, when I say the aide, the witness or the chacham, we can repeat that over and over. If he was married at the time of his testimony, and then subsequently his wife died, then he's allowed to marry this woman. Why does the Mishnah have to say that his wife died? What did it say? See, we're before Cherem to Reinu Gersh, so a man is allowed to marry two wives. Mesu in. And not only that, there's even a greater diuk here. If you read the Mishnah carefully, the Mishnah says that his wife died. What would be, in another case, let's give a different scenario. Let's say he divorced his wife. Nisgarshu lo. Because that could be all part of his original plan. His plan was to wait to divorce his wife until he could be matir this woman by testifying that her husband died or her husband divorced her. And then, since he's married, so there's not going to be any chashash, then he's going to give his wife a divorce and marry this woman. So the Gemara asks, Omalei Rav Hillel, Rav Ashi, Batanya, we learned in a brisa, Afilin is Garshu. In other words, the brisa adds a piece to the Mishnah. The Mishnah only mentions Mason, but this brisa adds Afilin is Garshu. That even if at some point he divorces his wife, he's allowed to marry the woman about whom or on behalf of whom he had testified. And we're not going to be choshesh that he was megarish his wife in order to marry this woman. So we now have a contradiction between our Mishnah and the Brisa. The Brisa seems to expand on the Mishnah in a way that the Mishnah would not have allowed so. Because the Mishnah should have told me explicitly that chiddush, that afilin is garsha, even if he divorces his wife, he's allowed to marry this woman. Apparently, if he divorces his wife, that's not enough of a reason to be matir. We're still choshesh that maybe he deliberately, orchestrated it such that he would first testify against, the husband of this woman, and then he would divorce his wife and then marry this woman. Lokash. The Gemara says we can reconcile this brisa of nisgarshu mutaros, right, with our Mishnah that doesn't mention nisgarshu. Why? The case of the brisa is the havi kitata. Kitata means that there's already some contention, some friction in the marriage, way before this testimony came into Beis Din. Meaning, I don't want to go too far here, but the stage was set already before the Avis for his divorcing his wife, right? He's testifying about the husband of Rachel. He's married to Leah. There's already, the seeds of contention between he and Leah, his wife, have already been planted. We're almost waiting for the moment that he delivers again. And therefore, we're not going to say that, he set this all up and the Brisa is going to allow him to divorce her. It's almost as if, the divorce took place way back when. So he writes here in the Masechet, I know, John, you have Masechet on the top left. Do you see that? Mm-hmm. The Havi Kitata, Beineim, L'Nishoseyim, Kodem lizman shehi'idu ala isha. V'lachein lo chosheshin shenosan einov ba, u'mishum kach im li'achar Giresh es ishto mutter ba. Ba means Rachel, the woman about whose husband he had testified. But our Mishnah that says Mesu, which implies that in the case of this Garshu, he's not allowed to marry her, that's addressing the scenario de lo havi ktata. There's no prior evidence or indication of some sort of friction in the marriage before he went and he was matir the isha. And therefore, asurim b'ch shechosheshin shegirshu es nishaseim mishum shenosan einav ba. Since there's no reason to assume that he wants to divorce his wife, we therefore have reason to suspect that maybe when he does divorce his wife, it's because he made a decision that he'd rather marry this woman than his own wife. Iba is saying mahava both the Mishnah and the Brisa talking Kigon to lo havi ktata. And now, if it's the case of lo havi ktata, we have to understand the Brisa. Lokash hadi argilhu hadi argila he. As we were medayik from the Mishnah, then in the case of nisgarshu asur, that's a case of the argilhu, which means that he instigated this fight, this marital contention, and now we're beginning to be choshesh in our Mishnah's context, that the reason why he generated this ketata is because he likes this woman and he wants to marry her, and that's why he testified about her husband that he died, and therefore he wants to divorce his wife, so he starts up with her, creating a certain tension deliberately. But the Bryce is talking about the Argila he. She was the one who initiated this kind of friction in the marriage. He did not cause the circumstances that led up to the marriage. He was not the cause of the divorce that led up to the divorce. He was not the cause of the divorce. And therefore we have no reason to be choshesh that he was divorcing her because he likes this woman, Dasan Einavba, and therefore he's allowed to marry. Now the Mishnah says, Kulam nisu lacherim, if she, about whose husband he had testified, married someone else, and her husband divorced her or died, then the witness is allowed to marry. A salka daitov, the Gemara right now thinks, with regard to our Mishnah, that misa am misa begerichin agerichin. In other words, what happened in the second marriage, right? The first marriage was the marriage in which Rachel was allowed to get a heter from the Bezdin because of the testimony of the witness regarding her husband. Now we have the second marriage. She was free from the first marriage based on the evidence, and now she married a second husband. And he died. And that's a case in which the Mishnah says that the aide had testified on the death of her husband. Based on establishing the death of her first husband, she was permitted to marry a second husband, which she did, and the second husband died. At that point, we're going to permit the aide to marry her. And we're matching up Misa with Misa. His testimony was on the death of her husband. Her second husband died. Well, Gerish and Igerish, we're going to match up Gerish and Igerish. He testified or brought a get that to the effect that she was divorced from her first husband, she married a second husband, and she was divorced from her second husband. So he writes here in the Masifta, Af al ofen shel hamevi get said Dino shelo yisas ishto. Im holcha v'nisei sliachim v'niskarcha, muteres linosei lamevi get mi bin sayam, afshe b'shnei ofanim elu nisarmala mishnei ba'aleha, on his garsha mishnei ba'aleha. Afal pichen muteres linosei b'pam shlishis. So what's the chiddush here? In both occasions, whether it's her first husband or her second, she had the same occurrence that repeated itself. Either her husband died, or, both husbands died, or both husbands divorced them. We're not going to assume like a mixed match, that the aide testified about her first husband that he died, and about the second husband divorced her. But twice she was married, and in each respective case, her husband died. So this leads us to a sugya of chazakah. Now, there's gigantic machlokas about chazakah, whether it applies only after 3 times of a recurrence of an event, or even twice is enough to create a chazakah. And we have a concept, a category called katlanit. It's not politically correct to use this terminology today in modern society, but she's a killer wife. She knows how to kill her husband. I don't mean literally, shoot the gun, but somehow, she gets her husband so aggravated that he DD, And the question is, are you allowed to marry a katlanis? She already has a record. Imagine, let's say we go, Rebbe says that a chazak is twice. Let's say we go like the chacham of Rebbe, that a chazak is 3 times. Like, for example, a shara muad was no gea 3 times. So she killed 3 husbands, if you follow when I use the word kill. And I'll get killed for saying this, but that 3 husbands she lost. She buried 3 husbands. You're not allowed to marry. You're putting your life into danger of being the 4th one that she would kill. According to Rebbe, twice makes a chazak. So if a woman was married twice, and in both cases her husband died, she's a katlanis, and you should not marry her. This aide is being allowed to marry a woman who lost and buried 2 husbands.
Third son.
That's an excellent question. In other words, according to Rebbe, maybe the reason why, what was the name of this? There was Er, Onan, and Shelah. So maybe Jeff's analysis, based on Rebbe, Yehuda did not want to give Shelah to marry Tamar because she was a katlanis. Yeah. The only thing is the Torah, again, I don't know if Yehuda knew this or didn't know this, but the Torah itself testifies why they died. And the blame is not on Tamar, it's on them. Asura, Beinei Hashem, etc., Shazartz, or whatever it says over in the Pasuk. So now we have to raise another question. Was Yehuda aware of this? The Torah is telling you from a divine perspective, revealing why they died. But you're right. Assuming, let's say Yehuda didn't know about this, and maybe that's why. But in our Mishnah, so Neimas Nisan Lo Karevi Di Karevi Omer Betray Simli Havi Chazaka. And by the way, this machlok between Rebbe and Chacham is here in Masechet Yevamot, much later on in the famous sugya period of Arivia. So the case of Rebbe is that Isha Niseis Li Echad Umeis, Akach Niseis Li Echad Umeis, so her second husband likewise died. Then we don't allow a 3rd marriage because she's already a katlanit. She's already proven herself with a chazaka of a pattern that she's a husband killer. And here we have a woman who was married twice and both husbands died. Alternatively, we have a woman whose both husbands divorced her. That also creates a chazaka, according to Rebbe, that she is a woman who can't, she can't keep a marriage going. And therefore, once the chazaka of two gerishins, two nisgarshu pamayim, has been established according to Rebbe, then we're not going to encourage him to be the third one to enter into a marriage relationship. Now, the Tanav Mishnah must be reflecting the shita of the Chachamim, who established chazaka only with 3 times. And the Gemara later on Samach Dalet in Yevamot identifies the Chacham as Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. He dissents, he rejects Rebbe, and he holds that there's no chazaka until three times. So does it mean that our Mishnah can only be reconciled with Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and it's against Rebbe? No. We can even reconcile our Mishnah with Rebbe. How so? And the answer is Misa Gerishim. We're going to mix match. Do you follow? In other words, we're going to say the following: that the aid, again, we're going to have 2 scenarios. So scenario number 1 would be that the aid testified that her husband died. She got married to another man and he divorced her. So she only has 1 Misa Sabal and 1 Gerishim. Or alternatively, Gerushin Amisa, or the aide testified that she had a get from her first husband. She married a second husband who died. So there was no chazaka whatsoever, even according to Rebbe, because there's no repeat pattern here. She was an almana from her first husband and a gerusha from her second husband. Therefore, she's not called a katlanit. Hence, the aide is allowed to marry. The Mishnah says, "V'kulon mutaros livneim olachien." All these ladies who became also to marry those who were matir them to get married, but they can marry the relatives of that aid, of that witness, or that chacham. Remember, Maishna. How is that different from a Mishnah that we have later on at Daf Tzadi Zayin? What is not? Nitan min ha'isha. If a person, there's a rumor, a very nasty, negative rumor about a person that he is suspect of having znus with a woman, he's called a nitan min ha'isha. And by the way, when it says min ha'isha, it means even a pruya, even a woman who's not married. In other words, he has a reputation of having, lived around, if you know what I mean. So according to the strict letter of the law, although we're not going to allow him to marry this woman because he's already chashuv that he had znus with her, but he's allowed to marry her relatives. Right? Lo nesru v'krovos ha'isha. However, that's only on a doraisa level. But on a drabanan level, asur be'ima u'bebita u'ba'chos. What's happening here? A man is suspect of having a relationship with, let's give it a name, with, let's say, Rivka Bas Sarah. Okay? We're not going to allow him to marry Rivka's mother, Sarah. Why? Because since we suspect that he already had an intimate relationship with Rivka, the daughter of Sarah, and now if he marries Sarah, her mother, she's going to come around on a regular basis, to visit her mother. And she's there with her stepfather, but she already had a relationship with her stepfather, according to this rumor. And if she's alone with him at some point, he's going to be tempted to have another intimate relation. Now, if he does, chas v'sholom, have that relationship, so the original relationship, the fling, was with a pruya. She was not married, but now she's the daughter of his wife. That's an Isa Kares, or maybe even an Isa Misa. Once he marries the mother, and again, it could be the opposite. He had a rumor that he was having an ongoing relationship with the mother, and now he marries the daughter. And if he would now have a relationship with the daughter, if he would now have a relationship with the mother again, he would violate an Isser Erva of Isha Ubita. And that's what we see in the Mishnah on Daf Tzadi Zayin. So the Gemara asks, in this case of Nitan al Isha, you're telling me he cannot marry one of her relatives because we're always afraid that if he does so, then the woman that he had an immoral relationship will be always visiting them. So then let's go back to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says that he's not allowed to marry the woman about whom her husband he testified to be matira, but he can marry any of her relatives. So the Gemara is bothered. Based on the principle in the Mishnah later on, we should prohibit him, again, the witness, not only from marrying the woman who he is matir through his aidus, but even one of her relatives. Why? So this is, again, this is a little bit way out, but they used to have what they call them, soap operas. This is like a soap opera. Shema asu ha'ish va'isha halolu arma beineim shekrovo yisa'ena kidei she'erogil etzla v'yizana ima. Wow, this is mamish wild. This is a whole plot. I'm going to call it a romantic plot, but it's not a kosher romantic plot. It's a very treif plot plan. They plotted together, the witness and this married woman, that he would testify to allow her to get married. He will then marry one of her relatives. She will hang around and they'll be doing what they shouldn't be doing, if you know what I mean.
Well, bring him in close.
Right. To bring him in close when he marries one of her relatives. And again, this is all based on a chash that the reason he testified against her husband is because he has a thing going with her. You know, he has feelings for her. I'm just using it in that general term. And if we think he has feelings for her, and that's why he falsified his testimony, then we should not even allow him to marry one of her relatives, because that could be part of the plan, that she will hang around visiting her mother, her daughter, her sister, whatever it is, so that they can somehow, implement an intimacy. Again, you've got to be very creative here. You almost have to write a novel here to figure out all the different calculations as to what they were planning to do here. So the Gemara says that there's no, how should I say, contradiction between the principle that underlies the Mishnah later on, where the prohibition applies and extends to the relatives as well, and our Mishnah, which only applies to her and not to her relatives. Nitshei negabi nitshei, shchichi de'azla. Gavre legabi gavre lo shchich. Which means the following: that if we're talking about nitshei legabi nitshei, like for example, a man is a nitan and then he marries her mother. So women, will visit. Will what's the word I'm looking for? Will what's the word? They get together very often. They socialize. So that's a good one. So they go from one place to the other to be together to socialize. And if he's going to marry one of the relatives of the nitan, actually nitan here is in feminine, so it's nitenes, then the nitenes is going to show up very often because women socialize with women. They play mahjong together. I don't know what they do. They schmooze. And since he has a relationship, a feeling for her, then he might come to be alone with her, etc., etc., and then he could violate an Isa Karis or an Isa Bisa. But Gavra Legabi Gavra, lo shchich. Because the men don't socialize one with each other that much. So let's just see how that impacts here on our case. Not allowed to marry this woman. Just 1 second. So he testifies again that her husband died, and surely not the Misha Hitira. Now he wants to marry her relative. We're not choshesh. What? She yelech lebase krova. Why is it krova? I don't understand. Again, if you tell me, just give me 1 second, and then he's not gonna, can't allow to marry this woman. But now we're afraid that maybe he's going to marry one of our relatives. Because if he marries one of her relatives, she's gonna show up. So what does it mean with base krova? I just don't understand base krova here. Yeah, Mitch, what are you saying?
Say she married his brother. You're not worried that he's going to go to his brother's house. No, that will same way. It's different.
Well, wait a second. I thought we were learning in our Mishnah that he's allowed to marry. 1 second. Let me just go over the scenario in my mind one more time. Person marries Eres Livnehem La'achehem. Eres Livnehem La'achehem. Oh, I got it. So the Mishnah is established that we're not afraid that he set this up to testify that she's allowed to get married in order that his brother or his son should be able to marry. Now, it's that far we're not going, but we are afraid that maybe he would have wanted to marry her, correct? So the question is, if you allow her to marry his son, then he'll come to visit his son. That's what we're saying, that Gavri Gavri lo shchicha. Inami, and the Gemara gives another distinction. Nishei de lo osran shchivasan adadi lo kapti adadi. Gavri de osran shchivasan adadi kapti adadi. So now we're introducing an element called kpeda into this equation. He says, "Noshim shein shchivas nus shalachas mikrovos ishtos osus olavis ishto." In other words, if he has a relationship with one of his wife's relatives, then he can still remain married to his wife. Therefore, kapti adod enon kpedos achas al shnia. Af im korvosel yiznu im bailo lo te oser yel bailo. Lachena nita min isha oser korvosel af im yiznu min korvosel ishto tishto. Notice we don't assume that his wife is going to object because their marriage is not, so to speak, in jeopardy. And therefore, we have more of a chash that he might have his nus relationship with that woman that he in the past has had an intimate relationship with. And his wife might just, she might just swallow it and shut up because her marriage is not on the rocks. It will not be undermined. But Gavri, the Osa Shkivasan Adad. Okay, now we get to the Kapte Adad. So Gvarim Shenesorim Lineshoseim Ayidei Shkivas Hasheni. Okay, Shem Yizna Adam in Neshoseim Asura Labailo Li Olam Kapte Adad. Makpinin Echad Al Hashem Shlo Yitzchak Ish Neshoseim. Okay. Isha Shasura Linase Levishi Tira Muteris Linase Lekrovov. And again, even if she's marrying his son, which means that he'll have occasions to visit his son, and therefore there may be yichud and so forth and so on. But we're not choshesh she is zana, because his son is going to be makpid. He's not going to allow his father to have yichud with this woman because he knows that if that yichud, heaven forbid, will lead to the actualization, the implementation of a Maisa Bia, then that will bust up his marriage. He can no longer remain married. So the Gemara asks, Hachi Aviv Nami, right? She's allowed to marry his relatives. And it says in the Mishnah, Libneim Olacheim, implying that she's not allowed to marry his father. The Gemara says the same logic should apply even in a case where she marries his father. Why did the Mishnah omit the case of his father, which implies that she's not allowed to marry his father? The Gemara says, no, you misunderstood it. It's not that the Mishnah omitted the case of the father because that would be awesome, but rather that case goes without saying. Lo mi boicham. I didn't have to tell you about the father. That was understood. Lo mi boy aviv. There's no question in our minds. It's a double push that she's allowed to marry the father of this witness. The beziz b'nei mineh. If she marries his father, then for sure she would not have a relationship with the aide himself, with the son, because the son himself is afraid, he has a natural fear of his father. So he's not going to go anywhere near his father's wife. Avol ibno lo bazis aviv minei. That the father is not afraid of his son. It's the son who's afraid of the father. The father's not afraid of the son. Is then maybe the father will have znus with her. Amalo is kamash malan. No, she's allowed to marry even the son or the brothers or any of the other relatives because Gavri kapte adadi, and there's going to be on the part of the husband, there's going to be meticulous care not to allow her to be alone with him meaning the aide, the witness. There's a lot of psychology here in this Gemara, a lot of very subtle psychological analysis. So that ends the second paragraph. So let's try our hand at the third paragraph. Now, I'm going to reserve the right to decide in the next couple of days whether I want to learn the third paragraph. I might want to skip to a different paragraph because I suspect that the third paragraph is very complicated. when I say complicated, my mind has, I guess that's my Likud. All these diagrams, the football, the marriage to this match, that. So we'll see how bad is bad. Arba Achim. So he calls it here Ruvain, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. Nayim Nesuin L'Shtei Achyos. So 2 out of the 4 brothers are married to 2 sisters. Again, he gives a case here that Ruvain marries Rachel and Shimon marries Leah. Rachel and Leah are sisters. Umesu Ruvain v'Shimon. And Nesuim Es Ha'achos. So the 2 brothers that are married to 2 sisters died. And now these 2 sisters fall for Yibum for Levi and Yehuda. Let's just think about this. 2 sisters fall for Yibum to Levi and Yehuda. So what's the issue here? I mean, can we anticipate what the Mishnah is bothered by? You have two Yevamos that are falling in front of 2 Yevamot. So obviously the first question is, why can't Yehuda be miyabem one of the 2 sisters, and Levi could be miyabem the other of the 2 sisters? Why is that a problem? So let's see what maybe it's a chos puzzle. That since, let's say both Rachel and Leah fall to each one of these 2 brothers. What? And each one and he can't possibly, maybe it works like this. He can't possibly marry both of them. When I say he, it's the Yehuda, Levi, Yehuda, doesn't matter, because then he'd be marrying 2 sisters, which he can't do. That's a chos ish. And now, even though he didn't marry either of the 2, right? Let's say he wasn't miyab either of the 2, but there's a zikas yibum to both of these sisters. So each one is achos kukos. Let's see if we got it right. Arei elu cholzos lo misyabos. Mikevon cheshtem kukos liyibum milevi v'Yehuda. I don't know what he means by milevi v'Yehuda. I would have said Reuven and Shimon. I don't know what he means. Lochein osel yavim af achas mehen. Oh, here it is. So, John, if you're with me, it's on Gimel. The top of Gimel, if you know what I mean.
That's right.
Okay, good. He says, Mishum shekol achas hi achos kukaso. Not bad. Shows that we know something. Not much, but achos kukaso. Because again, both Rachel and Leah fall for Yibum to both Levi and Yehuda. So we can choose one of the 2. Let's talk about Levi. Each of these 2 women, again, through 2 brothers who died, right, now have a zikas yibum to Levi. So therefore, each one is the sister of his kuka. And since zika is like a marriage relationship, it's like achos ishto. Ve'achos kukaso asura ke'achos ishto. Very good. Now, the question is whether that's the oraisa or the rabbanon. I'd like to know. He says in the footnote, Pirashnu Hamishna Lefi Mandi Omar Yesh Zika. B'Gemara Yivur Hatam L'Mandi Omar Ein Zika. So we're going to have to find another explanation for the Mishnah if we hold Ein Zika. He's got a long, complicated kasha here in the footnote. I'll just read it very quickly. We didn't even get to B'chalitza psula eino tzricha lachzor al kol ha'ach. This is way beyond. We didn't get to this yet. Okay, so I'm going to leave that out for the time being. Again, I'd love to know whether or not achos kukaso is doraisa. Let's just see the next footnote. Kosma Rashba, atam shechayos chlitzim mishum shazika hivak midrabana. Ooh, that's good. The Isa b'Gemara. Im hazika isa doraisa lo hoisa tzricha filu chalitza. This would come under Erev. V'chein kosvu shamar amban v'aritva v're'ei v'chidusha Rabbi Nachum shekosa b'shem Rab Aaron Kotler. Whoa, I don't know how that happened. Rab Nachum was here in Yerushalayim. Maybe Rab Nachum came from Kletsk. I don't know where. I thought he was born in Yerushalayim. I guess not. Anyway, she'ef shalom she'af al pisha zika midaraisa mikol makom tzrichos chalitz. So I'm not sure why that's so, but intuitively it sounds right. You know, I can really identify with this. Even if you hold zika's doraisa, but that doesn't undermine the entire nefila for yibum in a case of achos kukasa. It's a different kind of an erev relation. It doesn't completely undermine the zika. I mean, he can't be miyabima because obviously she's achos kukasa. But to say therefore she doesn't need chalitza because zika torais, I don't know if we have to go that far. But in any event, leaving out Rab Nachum here, the simple, straightforward pshat in the Rashba is that we are understanding that zika is the rabbanan. That's why she needs chalitza. I mean, they both need chalitza. Next, im kadmu v'kantu. Right, we always ask the question: is there a difference between lechatchila and b'diavad? So now, each one of these brothers was miyabem. This one Rachel and this one Leah. Yotziu. We're going to force a divorce. So you're not allowed to live with achos kukasa. Period. That's an ongoing aver. Either midrabanan or midraisa. Rabbi Eliezer says, wait a minute, you know what? Don't just make a flat statement of Yotziu. It really depends on another machlokas. And that is between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai Omer Yikayim, Beit Hillel Omer Yotziu. Now, in the footnote, he says that it's possible that this whole business of Yotziu, of Beis Hillel, is all a knas. Because the Chachamim said, Yesh Zika, and therefore she is achos kukaso, and you're not allowed to be miyabim. And he went in and he was miyabim her, and he violated the law of the Chachamim, the prohibition of the Chachamim, and therefore we have to punish him. We have to impose a penalty, a knas. Therefore, we're going to force him to divorce his wife. And that's Beis Hillel. Again, everything seems to be built on the premise this Isur of Achos Kukaso is the Rabbana. So he violated the Rabbana. We don't have to bust up the marriage, but the answer is knas. So that's a whole new, sheds a whole new light on this halach of Yotziu. But apparently, from the note here in the Masechet, it seems that there are others would say this is not a knas, but this is me'ikar adin, meaning that, again, if I understand correctly, that either Zika is Doraisa, or maybe he's saying the Rabbanan upgraded the status of Zika Rabbanan as if it were a Doraisa. Therefore, we have to follow through and break up this marriage. Now, I'm not sure, but I think Rabbi Eliezer is just interpreting the word Yotziru. He's embellishing it. He's not arguing against the Tanakama. Tanakama was talking about Beis Hillel, and that's what Rabbi Eliezer wants to point out. Wait a minute, don't forget Beis Shammai. Achas mehen asura al ha'echad be'iser erva. So one of these two sisters is an erva. All right, let's see if we can figure this out on our own. Again, I'm going to put my head out here on the chopping board, but let's see. If one of those two sisters, Rachel or Leah, is an erva to Levi, let's say, so then Levi should be able to be miyabe the other sister. Let's say Rachel is an erva to Levi, so Rachel doesn't fall for Yibum to Levi, and therefore only Leah falls for Yibum to Levi. So he could be miyabe Levi. He could be miyabe Leah. Would that have any impact on Yehuda? No, that should have no impact on Yehuda, because Rachel is an erva to Levi, not to Yehuda. Let's see what happens here. Kigon, he gives you an example here with a whole diagram. Rachel hi chamoso shel Levi. In other words, Levi was married, or is married, to the daughter of Rachel. So Rachel is his shviga. O em chamoso shel Levi. In other words, Levi is married to Rachel's granddaughter. Shasura olav be'isur kares, v'adidu sheptura b'chalitza u'miyibum. Maybe he means what we said. There's no nefila. Im kenarein is kuka. So we're on track. Asurba mutar b'chosa, says the Mishnah. Levi obviously cannot be miyabe his mother-in-law or his grandmother-in-law, meaning Rachel, but he could be miyabe Leah. Leah's achos kukasa. No, Rachel is not skuka to Leah. Asheni also b'shtein. This has no impact on Yehuda, because as far as Yehuda is concerned, each one of these two women is achos kukasa. So at the end of the day, as a result of this erva, Levi could be miyabe the other sister, meaning Leah. He can't be miyabe Rachel, but Leah is not achos kukaso because Rachel never fell for Yibum to him. Rachel is his mother-in-law. Okay, we're not doing so terribly. So how are we doing on the clock? I don't know. Oh, we still have a few more minutes. So now, what happens be Isur mitzvah? So Isur mitzvah is always the Rabbanan. I think we saw that in the past. Which means that Rachel is Shnios Larayos to Levi. So I would have said, again, I'm just trying to guess what the kivun here, the Mishnah, is that since on a Doraisa level there's no erva, then nothing changed over here. We can go back to the original position, and Levi and Yehuda will both give chalitza. Kigon, he gives a case here. Rachel asura Levi be'isa shnios larayos shegazu behen rabbanon. Okay, so that's Isur mitzvah is arayot sheisuran b'rabbanon. otherwise known as Shnios Larayos. The Isur Kedusha. So Isur Kedusha means that it's not an erva with a chi of kares, it's chayve lav, like mamzeres. It means that one of the brothers had no right legally to marry his wife, whether it be Rachel or Leah. She was a mamzeres, but he went and he married. But this seems like a whole nother subject matter, about Isur Kedusha. Is choletzes v'lo misyabemes, which means we go back to, just 1 second. Choletzes v'lo misyabemes. In other words, there isn't a field for Yibum, which means we go back to the original case. In a case of an Isur Kares, like for example, Chamoso, when Rachel falls for Yibum to Levi, so there's no nefila for Yibum. Levi could therefore be miyabe Leah, right, her sister. But if in a case where Rachel is a mamzeres, leave out mamzeres. If Rachel is shnios, like for example, Aim Imo, whatever the case might be, then she's kukal Yibum. The Rabbanan will not allow Yibum. And there's no Yibum for another reason, on the Raisa level perhaps, of a chos kukos. Now the Mishnah, it's a whole nother discussion. And what happens if Rachel is a mamzeres? So here too, there's no Yibum. Why wouldn't the mitzvah of Yibum override the lotas? Why don't we apply Esei Docha Lotas? So I guess because there's an option of chalitza, or whatever answer you'll give. So Isur Kedushi says shehi asura olav be Isur lav. The Isur lav. Does he give you an example of an Isur lav? Chaf Hey. Kamo almana l'kohen gadol, rusha b'chalutz l'kohen hejot. Mamzeres. That's what I wanted to get to. Mamzeres li Yisrael. Or bas Yisrael l'nosim u'lemams. That's what we have. And the only question is, can we fit in the last few lines of the Mishnah so that we can make a siyum at least on the Mishnah? We'll try it. If it works, it works. Paisa achas mehen asura al ze be'isur erva. Okay, so far we had this case, right? Rachel is chamoso, let's say, or whatever you use, Isur Kares, vis-a-vis Levi. Vashnia, the other sister, that's Leah, is Asura al Zebi Isur Erev. So in other words, both sisters, each of the two sisters, vis-a-vis each of the two brothers respectively, is an Isur Erev. So therefore, it seems like both of them should be able to be miyabem the other sister. Let's see if I'm right. Is Asura Lezem, Muteres Lezem, Asura Lezem, Muteres Lezem. Perfect. Everything fits in beautifully. There could be Yibum. Levi could be miyabem, let's say Leah, because Rachel is Chamos. And Shimon could be miyabem Rachel because Leah is Chamoso, and everything is hunky-dory. And then the Mishnah says, V'zui sha'amru, achosa kishehi yevimto, ochol letzes omis yabemes. So noflu shtei achios liyibum, the achas mein erva, muteres achosa l'syabim. Zuhi pirush masha omru li el chavtes. He says, he doesn't tell you where it is exactly. Chavtes, maybe it's no. I don't know what exactly it means. Perik Sheni, achosa Kishiyavimta. Achosa shel isha shehi asura be'isur erva. Right, so the sister of the Isur erva, like for example, Rachel is an erva on vis-a-vis Levi, and Rachel's sister Leah is not an erva. She avimto is ocholetz obis yavemis, right? He has the option of yibum. Very good. So we finished the Mishnah. Let's just make a note of it. And tomorrow we can start the Gemara. So I'm very excited because I had this overwhelming fear about starting the third parak, but I think we're okay. Which may mean, I don't want to jump to any conclusions, that we've been doing a half-decent job. This is a doozy of a Masechet. Begin to understand how you can learn this in a daf yom. I mean, to me, it's a shura yomis, I would call it, if you're lucky. How long is this parak, by the way? Starting on what daf chaf vav, and it ends on lamed he. So it's about 10 blocks, am I right? Okay then, gentlemen, I wish you a good day.